Let's go with the pizzazz, jazz hands, yeah. So, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our show, Between Two Bits. So this show is going to be very, very simple. We're just a bunch of brilliant tech geeks. Now we're going to be talking about a couple of subjects, giving a bit of our views, and we're a pretty good team who don't stop arguing between ourselves, start giving our opinions, are extremely opinionated. So please, if there's any issues, you can always just move forward to my own bits. But that's because that's me. I'm Jason. I'm superstar around here, but I also have three other superstars with me today. So one of my sides, I've got my colleague Richard. Say hi, Richard.
Hi, Jason. And a superstar, really? I mean, you're setting the bar high for yourself there, Jason. But okay.
But it's the first episode, man. It's the first episode.
I know. It's the first episode, but I just think. I'm going to set the bar low. I'm a reasonable techie. I'm not a geek. I know how many bits are in a byte, but I've also got a social life. So, and after that, we're going to introduce you to Justin, who I don't know if he's on the left or my right, but to Justin, introduce yourself.
I'm Justin, and what strikes me is, Jason, you use the word brilliant, and I mean, just looking around me and knowing what's inside this head, I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. And I think the term you're looking for, Richard, is B-lister. You might be a tech B-lister. So I'll turn it over to Joseph next to me.
So Joseph, I'm here to represent the millennials. I don't know if are we feeling like age gaps here. I'm trying to keep it attract the younger audience. Let's say this is what I'll bring the younger audience view into the conversation.
I'm not sure what he's saying about you guys, but
okay, boomer. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, yeah. Oh, you got there first, Jason. Damn it.
Sorry.
All right, Justin. Just so you know, I paid attention to that. It's noted. You're going to get some. Okay, let's carry on.
When you least expect it, Jason.
When you least expect it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, how's that for an intro? So the question is, what are we talking about today? So let's break this in half. Joseph, what are we talking about today?
Shadow IT.
Versus? Who's next?
Regular IT.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So usually when we start looking about shadow IT versus IT, what's the current thinking? Let's just put it out there. What's the biggest problem of shadow IT? And where do we think things should really be at?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is define what we mean by shadow IT. Because there are, different realms of shadow IT. And, when you think about shadow IT, you think about central IT, maybe not managing systems or not owning systems, or maybe not, controlling the systems, or maybe not even being aware of the systems. So I guess there are many different levels of the disengagement that the shadow IT pirates are nefariously up to out there.
It's interesting that you put it that way. Entirely negative. Everything you said there was entirely negative, which does go along with the name, I guess. And whenever you hear shadow IT being spoken about, it's about security issues, cost implications, interoperability issues. One piece of software won't necessarily work with another piece of software. But I think if we were to sort of open this up a little bit, I think there are various potentially pros and cons to shadow IT. And I think we really just focus on the cons. Or maybe that's the message that IT tried to put out there, so that we don't get to see the pros because it makes more work for them.
Yeah,
so
I definitely.
The whole shadow IT is bad, IT is good, me, Tarzan, you, Jane, is it really that black and white?
I mean, even if the name shadow, I would say even the name shadow has like a negative connotations to it. So, but maybe we can start discussing and see what positives are in it, what negatives are in it. Who wants to present the IT positive?
Let's do this upside down, though. The other way around.
You think?
Does it make sense anyway? Let's start with the positives, man.
Of shadow IT?
Yeah, and now everyone's going, whoa, there are positives now.
There are definitely
positives. Oh, no, there are loads of positives as far as I'm concerned. I mean, for example, when IT put in a firewall You can get around it by using your own VPN that you set up. That's great, which means you can get access to all sorts of stuff. I mean, they don't like that, of course. I am mucking around, of course, a little bit there because they wouldn't want you to do that. And I guess that's the reason, one of the massive arguments against shadow IT. But I mean, it allows you to get your job done, doesn't it? There are some times where you just have a requirement to fulfill that you can't do or can't carry out without going to tools that the company haven't authorized.
But is it IT or is it compliance, regulation, and all these other legal stuff?
I think it's regular IT, because I've been guilty of just wanting to get some work done, having a specific tool that just fits my needs, and then just instead of going through the big machine and trying to get it certified by IT and then distribute it around, I just go about doing my own thing in my own corner as fast as I could.
So is that because you like getting your work done now and not getting your work done in 3 weeks' time?
Yeah, and also sometimes the use case is so niche to you that you don't know if it fits the entire organization use case. You just want to get your own thing done as fast as possible. Right?
Yeah, and it's not just that you want to get your own thing done as fast as possible. You're given a task to do or something to achieve. And the thought process from the people that ask you to do it doesn't necessarily include going via the IT team to get a piece of software authorized. They just want you to get something done. And being able to download a piece of software that you're familiar with and can do the job in 5 minutes and then do the job in the next half an hour is far preferable to everybody, apart from IT, but far preferable to everybody than having to actually go through that rigmarole of jumping through hoops and over hurdles to get.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up something though that is, that's debatable. I think in many cases, we burden IT with these asks, and you've got a little SaaS app that you need to use to get something, to do a specific task, and I think they are as overwhelmed by the process as anyone else is, and so I think that goes both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's like, are you looking at probably using non-sanctioned programs? Is it a solution? I remember one story that I was talking to the CISO once from a government department, and these things always happen in the government. It's incredible when you get these kind of stories, right? And they were saying, we're going to introduce a new database, but we have a really massive problem. There is 2 or 3 departments that work off a shared Excel sheet.
Oh,
right?
so
And
that
they're
start
very
already.
used to working there, and it's like, because the person in the one corner updates row A and F, the other one at the second corner updates row B and C, the other one does D and E. So it gets to a point where it's like, we need a centralized solution, but the department still wants to go back to their Excel, right? So would you see just because of convenience, it's something that should be allowed? Or is it something where you say, guys, at some point there has to be something there, right?
Oh no, I think shadow IT is subject to that. Excel could be shadow IT, right? In this case, and I know that I worked for a company that we had customers who would, it was a healthcare company, by the way. We had customers who would say, "Hey, we've got this problem. We need to fix it," and the developer would say, "Okay, send me your data," and they would shoot him right across email an Excel spreadsheet with 100,000 rows of healthcare data. And so I think that even simple tools that we all consider to be safe and approved are subject to the same types of concerns that we think about when we talk about traditional shadow IT.
And there's a specific areas you think which an organization is more prone to participating in those kind of practices?
Well, I'll say, how many people here? No, but seriously, how many people here that's taking part in this actually got IT to authorize the video software that we're using to do this, which is open source? How many? I didn't. I downloaded it and started using it. For all I know, this software here could be sending all of my data across the world. I'm pretty sure it's not, but none of us here, Chad, did we? Or maybe you did.
That's true. But also I think we didn't talk about certain use cases where it could be good. We said we're going to talk about positive shadow IT, but we straight up jumped into Excel sheets, which are the start of every nightmare in any security firm possible.
Unless you're an auditor.
Unless you're an auditor.
Or an accountant.
Well, I mean, but I think that potentially this is a positive. All of us here have been able to basically group together and record this remotely. We're all in very different locations, and we've done it by downloading software, which was suggested by one of us. Actually, no, I'm going to name him. It was Jason IT. Jason told us to do this.
Jason did it.
But yeah, Jason did it. It's all Jason's fault.
Suggested.
Your boy Jason does everything IT-wise, Sorry, guys. I'm the master of shadow IT. And to be honest, there's a reason for that also as well. There's always a reason for everything, isn't there? But it's like I requested a review of a technical program, and I'm still 2 months in and still waiting for that review to finish. So
that's another reason.
Speed and convenience over, getting the job done.
Yeah.
Where's that fine line? Is there a fine line?
I think the fine line would be on what you're working on specifically, because all the nightmare scenarios that we briefly stated had customer data. I think the moment you involve some sort of company data or customer data, this is when things start to go bad, because there is no control on who can access this information, where it's going, how it's ending up. Maybe someone, as you said, is sending this information across the world. It's out of the control of the central IT. And sometimes if you're just recording a podcast with your friends, it's less of a concern. So I think it's more about the scope you touch and the applications. I can give a positive example of a tool I use to crawl websites and notify me when MySQL or Oracle releases new libraries and so on. And I want to stay up to date. I want to inform my teams about all the new updates. And it's a bit harmless fun. And I use my own credit card to have a free tier and go around in my machine and crawl web pages. Seems like a bit of harmless fun.
I mean, fun crawling web pages for what was that? MySQL updates. That's your idea of fun. I feel like I feel like I've stepped up a bit here. If that's your idea of fun, I'm flying. No, I get what you're saying though. It does help with that, and I've done that a lot. In fact, I was introduced to Talend via Shadow IT. This was maybe 15 years ago. I needed something to basically crunch some numbers that Excel couldn't do. And I was looking around and I discovered Talend version, I can't remember which version it was, maybe 2, 3, I don't know. But I discovered Talend because of Shadow IT, because I couldn't find a tool or rather there was no tool at the organization I was working for that could do what I needed to do. I started Googling. And now I'm head of Talend community. So, I think there are massive positives to Shadow IT.
I need to contact that company that crawls websites. Is that what you're saying? See if they're hiring? This is the next step.
Well, I'd just like to say, I didn't call Talend to see if they were hiring. They contacted me, but anyway.
I don't feel like it's, whether this stuff is good or bad is a bit irrelevant, because the fact is that people are using applications and people expect to be able, this is a SaaS world that we live in. People expect to be able to, go online, enter their email address and intuit how to use some web-based application and start getting value out of it right away. And this is something that we see all the time. And I think, again, just like with an Excel spreadsheet or an application that might be, sending your information all around the world, you have to kind of try to be cognizant of those things and watch out for that. But the fact is, that kind of stuff aside, people are using this stuff and they're getting huge value out of it. So, I think it's almost better to think about the ways in which we can address the concerns that might be around shadow IT and the data that people tend to aggregate, especially, we all live in this world where we think about data and how organizations are using data all the time. And, when they're using an unsanctioned tool, what do you do with that data? How do you know that it's out there, and how do you address it?
So how do we enforce compliance? Like, how do we go about saying this is what's the correct way to use external applications in shadow IT, and what is wrong? I think this is would be.
There are practical steps. Yeah. I mean, you could go the whole. I'm gonna block everything. You're not gonna be allowed to install anything. I've been there in that kind of a business, and it's a nightmare to work with just on any normal day, right? But are there any, like Joseph says, are there any kind of practical steps that I see now? Here we're here talking about more about what the kind of solution could be. Well, so what is it you guys know of what it is that we? I mean, I
think
he's going rogue, right?
I think we've all had those really pesky trainings about security and compliance and IT and data that we have to do every 6 months, where we have all these different scenarios. Customers asking for your credit card on email, yes, no, that type of quiz. Do you think those work? Do you think? I don't know, because I tend, as a techie IT person, I tend to kind of just do them and brush them off, like, come on, really? But do you think they work?
I agree. I totally agree with you there, because the number of times that I spent more time in those training courses trying to work out how to quickly skip through the video without it actually blocking me from answering the questions than actually paying attention to the videos, it's ridiculous, because the questions are usually quite simple. I don't get them, but they tick boxes, don't they? It's a legal thing more than anything else, so that the legal team can say, everybody's been told this, we've made them watch it, therefore they've been informed that they need to be paying attention to it, I guess. I don't think
like a liability.
Yeah.
I think that kind of stuff has to exist. And I can tell you that one way that it does work is I am scared to death of every external email, just from the embarrassment that comes up if you inadvertently click on something and it says, this was a phishing test.
I think you should explain what those emails are, because we're all familiar with them. But we basically get these emails from external sources, and there's a magic link. And the moment we click on this link, we're on this page that says you're a loser, pretty much. You failed the phishing test.
Fail.
You're put on a list of IT losers.
It's the reason why they call it a phishing test, right? The phishing for people who... No, sorry, that's PH. Yeah.
The problem with those though, sometimes you'll get an email which is legitimate, just from a company or some source that hasn't thought about how the look and feel of their email. And you're sat there for ages thinking, I don't want to be caught out by the phishing test. Please don't let this be a phishing test. You waste so long trying to work it out. And then in the end, you're just like, do you know what? It's safer. I'd rather be safe than sorry. I don't want to have to do that. I failed a phishing test course after clicking the wrong button. So you end up rejecting it, and then you miss quite a few emails.
That happened to me once. Phishing. I received an email from a colleague, looked like a colleague, who was inviting me to use another resource hub. And I was like, wait, isn't it? I actually ended up reporting it to IT, and IT's coming back going, yeah, it's a new service. I'm like, yeah.
They said, no, this was legit.
I actually reported... kind of case,
if I delete a few emails along the way, hey, I'm probably happier for it. So,
price worth paying to avoid the screen, the big screen of shame.
I actually reported an email from the IT security team for being potentially phishing, because it was about the Log4j issue that we just had, and the information on there about it was so incorrect, so wrong. I was like, this has to be a phishing test. I reported it wasn't a phishing test. But, hey,
so in that kind of a case, is it a controls issue, or is it an enablement issue that you need to fix?
Well, we all agree that more control usually leads to more disobedience, right?
Nobody likes to be
The
controlled.
Yeah. I think the
Yeah,
more,
but
the
you
more,
still use Microsoft PowerPoint instead of using Libra
yeah.
views or
That's
whatever.
because I know it. It's because I know it. I mean, I tend to use stuff that I know and take preference. I prefer things that I know.
So if the company all of a sudden decided now we're going to move away from Windows and Microsoft Office, would you? Funnily enough, I actually worked at an organization that did that, and the amount of people complaining overnight was nuts.
Well, we just had that, didn't we? Because we moved away from, and there were a load of people that were up in arms about that because it didn't work in the way in which it used to work.
I don't think we can actually mention. By the way, guys, I don't honestly off thing.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. Cut
Francisco?
that.
I think no, I was going to say,
Yeah,
I think it's fine. It'd be interesting to have some bleeping going on in the video.
Can I just cut, move on 40 seconds later?
Actually, we can keep this conversation as well. Even superstars make mistakes, right?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes
from one provider to a different provider, we can probably say that.
Right? So remember recently when we went from one piece of software to another piece of software, and you all know what I'm talking about here. We all know what happened there. The problems were caused not because of the software as such. I think it was more to do with the fact it meant people had to change the way in which they worked. And that when in my consulting days, I was going in and I was implementing software that would change the way people would work. And people by default don't like having to change the way in which they work or change what they're used to doing. So I think what you were stating about having to use different types of software or use a piece of software which isn't authorized by IT, that's just going to, in some cases, mean that people have to learn something new, and nobody wants to do that. Not when they think that they know a piece of software which does the job anyway.
I just remembered something. The previous election cycle and all the in the United States and all the rumors about the email servers and politicians using personal emails servers to send personal emails about politics and so on. And I remember that being such a huge deal because indeed they were discussing matters of the state with other politicians or with foreign leaders. And since it was a public server, we know some got hacked, some got leaked, some got sent everywhere. That is a nightmare scenario, I'd say. And they probably used it because, as you said, they were more comfortable with a certain email provider or server of some sort. But
they used it because they hadn't seen the IT training to scare them into submission.
They used it to avoid the phishing emails, the test phishing emails. They're like, if I use the government one, then I have to keep dodging these phishing email tests. Whereas if you use Hotmail or whichever other brand you want to use, you don't get those.
So here right now, what we're looking at is the risk factor in shadow IT is immeasurable. And what IT is just trying to do is push down that risk in an organization, right?
Yeah.
So let's say though the risk factor for human behavior is immeasurable. Because I think when we get to what IT knows, what they control, a lot of these things are much smaller in scope than and more probably more controllable than people sending emails through their personal account with incredibly sensitive information.
Which also happens.
Yeah.
So in this kind of a case, I mean, what kind of considerations do you think maybe IT should take into account when it comes to the user? Is there a size-fits-all approach like what we generally tend to see? Or is it something which you think that maybe we should be looking at individual use cases, individual kind of business users and see where that should be going?
Well, I think there's another step that could be taken here, because if every IT department throughout the world has this issue with their employees downloading bits and pieces of software that they prefer over, or that does a job that they need to get done and the IT department don't provide that software. Well, if that's the case, why don't we just have a worldwide process, if you like, for IT professionals to help each other out and vet different pieces of software, and then use that software so that, or that logging, that mechanism, that information that they gather to say, okay, guys, we know that you want to download your own software. We know that we can't possibly provide you every little bit of software that you may need to do to carry out every single use case you may have. Here is a pool of software that has been pre-vetted by IT guys all around the world. We're pretty confident that these are safe. Select from these. And then obviously it motivates organizations that want to get their software, their free software or whatever software into that package of pre-approved softwares to actually get it done, get it in there.
Funnily enough, I used to be a channel manager for a cybersecurity company. And in the US, the federal government actually has that kind of a list of approved software and approved vendors of software and lists which can be used by each of the different branches of the government.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to get on that list?
I was just gonna ask the same exact question. This is a list I need to be on.
No, but it's like, if the federal government can do that, do you think maybe it's something which there could be a commercial version of it for the average organization?
Yes, but at the same time, you can have a certain piece of software that could be used in many, many ways, and in some ways could still continue to be as harmful. I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all situation.
You can't. I was going to say you can't defend against all bad actors, though. I mean, there will be people that will use all sorts of software which is safe. It is safe for people to use. It's safe for IT teams to have out there, but could still potentially be used by a bad actor to cause problems.
Yep.
So let's say, right, you can't stop it, but what if you come up with a set of recommendations for people considering this shadow IT approach? Mm-hmm. What's the first 5 things we would say?
Well, enablement, that preferably is not through interactive videos with bonkers scenarios, something maybe more tangible, more, I want to say fun, but at least more direct to real life scenarios that people could have. Maybe less shame around phishing emails could help. Maybe if I'm not saying we should not report phishing emails and so on, but maybe if people feel ashamed, they would usually not tend to do something. And I had an idea before this, when I was thinking maybe we can do something about budgeting. A lot of tools that are used in shadow IT are usually free tiers or stuff that are done on an individual basis. Maybe the IT department can be a bit more open on providing budgets for personal applications. But for that, you have to go still through the IT system just to ask for something for yourself, ask for some budget. So even if the IT doesn't control it, at least it would be aware of its existence. That could also be something. What do you guys think?
I quite like the idea of the per department or per employee budget for shadow IT requirements. Although I think they wouldn't be labelled for shadow IT requirements. They would have a more modern, positive term for it. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what that term would be. But yeah, I very much like that. I'm not entirely sure you can get rid of the security side of it. I think that if you were to go down this route, it would probably mean you'd actually have to potentially increase the size of your security teams. But maybe make them respond to people without judging so much. Because I do, go back to the phishing emails, I do feel judged if ever I've got one wrong. It's been a few times.
We've all been there.
They've lately been getting better though. It's harder to tell the difference now.
Well, it is. Have you noticed they seem to time themed phishing emails with events that are actually happening in the organization? So they're linked. You look at it and you quickly glance at it and you think, oh yeah, it's that event that's coming up. Let's check all of the links first, check the title, check the spelling.
Actually, I got a good example about that. I lived in Sweden for a very long time, and they had a crazy approach of telling you exactly where they were. So right
Really?
before the turns, they would tell you in 50 meters you have a safety camera, a security camera, in 100 meters, and it was just mostly so people would slow down on specific turns and not take the risk. And I thought that was genius. So maybe there's an IT equivalent to warning people ahead of time.
A while
Actually,
Is
it's
that
speed
in the
camera.
UK? Because in most of Europe, they have that. They actually tell you, look, you have a speed camera in 300 meters.
300 meters, yeah, it was great. I don't think they have those in France. In France, it's mostly let's catch you on a wrong turn. But yeah, if
Well, they don't have that for the mobile speed traps. They don't. Although there was a story that my father-in-law told me about some kids who had seen a mobile speed trap. They hid behind the corner before the speed cap with a sign basically saying there's a speed trap, sorry. And then following it behind the police officers, there was another group of kids saying, we were the guys that warned you. And they got paid loads by drivers that pulled over to drop them some spare change to thank them.
there you go,
That's
kids.
brilliant.
Find your nearest camera, get on it. This is the good way to make
Entrepreneurship.
good.
Drop the lemonade stand and make some real money.
This is
But
where
no,
the
but
money's
this-
at.
But this is a hint to the IT team. Anyone in the IT team, if you know any of these phishing emails are coming out, just let us know. I will pay. I will pay to know which ones are the phishing test emails and which ones aren't.
So is there an equivalent to the warning for speed test? Is there such a thing that we could do when it comes to data?
Yeah, you can see the videos. Enablement.
Enablement.
Doesn't really work, does it?
But to touch on that point, well, I think we're all familiar with the need for individuals in a company to leverage data and probably get some intelligence out of it, get information from customer data, from internal data in the company. And they tend to use personal software to, as Richard was saying, I want to get data from X to Y. I got this software called Talend. I used it. Do you think that there's a growing need for individuals in the company, individual contributors, to work around data? Is there more of a data-friendly approach in companies now than there used to be?
I think it depends on the industry more than anything, right? So you would expect when you're working with not pretty much customer data, but when you're working with patient data specifically, or you're working with highly classified pieces of data, which is customer data to a degree, but not as much. You do kind of expect that the standards are going to be much, much stricter, right? So in knowing that, kind of rephrasing your question, if there are any kind of advice you would give someone considering using their own program let's be a bit of devil's advocate here, right? So if there's someone who's considering using their own program to get something done, is there a set of sort of guidelines you would issue?
I'll make sure.
Deathly silence.
This is the hard question, guys.
That is the hard question. Are you manipulating sensitive information? If so, then maybe not. Are you sending this information voluntarily to a party that is not in the company? Maybe a set of questions like that could help mitigate the risk or get people to assess if it's a dangerous situation.
But the example you gave there is difficult for a lot of people. So if you go back to before we all heard about GDPR and I was working with data, if I had a list of addresses, just addresses, no names, just addresses, and I was asked if that was sensitive data, I would have said, no, it's not sensitive. They're just buildings. They're just where people live. It doesn't say that Mr. John Smith lives there or Jane Addams lives there. It's just a list of addresses. But for GDPR, that is actually classed as sensitive data now. So if you were for example, going around and canvassing each of those addresses, if for a political party, for example, because that's a good example, and you were to say, well, that person at number 1 John Street, they were very much in favour of our message, and that person at number 3 John Street, they were against it. That information there, although it doesn't identify the individual directly, that would still be classed as sensitive data. So it's a really difficult one to get people to assess what they believe is sensitive.
So in other words, what we're trying to say is, guys, avoid it at all costs, right? Pretty much. I think that's what we're trying to get to.
Yes, we've all done it, but it has too many downsides for any potential upsides.
I think I'm going to split the room here, because I'm not going with avoid it at all costs, because we're all hypocrites if we go down that route, because we're all doing it right now, as I said.
We're all doing
it right now, and I'm not going to be a hypocrite. So, Jason, you could be a hypocrite there and say, avoid it, do as I say, not as I do. But I'm going to say, do you know what? I think that so I'm being mean now, but I think there are pros and cons, and I think it's very easy to play devil's advocate on both sides, because there are so many pros, so many cons, and they can be balanced out. I think you just need to have people using their common sense to some extent, and maybe there does need to be a bit of education in there as well for the people that aren't techies. But I think you can rely on most people to make, or to try to make, sensible decisions, and it's just to facilitate them in that. So maybe we just need to have more people in IT who are there to help guide and help to answer questions on what sort of software would or wouldn't be acceptable.
What about the topics of certifications and audits? For example, HIPAA, as we were speaking about patient data, about SOC 2 and other audits, and they mostly rely on the customer information being under control, being anonymized, being stored in certain locations. These kind of certifications are quite thorough, and they usually would go through the central IT system. So we could also imagine a scenario where these shadow IT applications could be leaks to this data and could lead a company to potentially fail on security certifications, on audits, and so on. Sure, it's
great point. And thinking about the types of data that we onboard and the way we copy data around to do our jobs, that's a great point. I think IT is often unaware how many systems might be holding, for instance, GDPR sensitive records, HIPAA sensitive records, because people have used those in a report. They've copied them out to whatever their database is, maybe whatever their application is that they're using to analyze that data. So, that is where data discovery comes in, and IT's ability to at least know what systems might be out there being used, being copied to, could be really important, because, you can use automation and, point at that system and see what's there.
So finishing it off, what's the one, if you had one last comment to make on shadow IT versus IT, what would you say? This feels like a celebrity deathmatch already, doesn't it?
Last wish. To me, it feels like those when people smoke and they tell you don't smoke. It's kind of the same kind of sentiment. How do we control smoking? We don't know. It could be done in a controlled, fun manner, but could also lead to many bad side effects. And I think the same parallels. Kids don't smoke, but sometimes it could be good. That's my
so don't do it all the time. Occasionally is okay, but not all the time. What would I say? I am torn on this, because, as I just said, there are pros, there are cons. I am guilty of it, but I think that I do it in a responsible way. I mean, I don't download and use software which I haven't checked out, haven't researched first, and haven't spoken to people that have already played with it if I can. But IT do have to defend companies against litigation for spreading data that they shouldn't have been spreading or sharing, and all sorts of other bits and pieces like that. So I think there does need to be a bit of a compromise. I think education is important. In fact, if I was to answer any question as to how to solve any problem in the world, I think the first answer is always education. I think educating people into what is good, what is bad, how you can identify whether something is good or bad. I think that's the key. I'm going to go with education.
I agree with that. I think it comes down to, people understanding why. Why is this bad? What can a potential consequence be? And how do you typically avoid that situation? And so I'm fully on board with the education. And I don't hate the IT trainings as much as everyone else here, evidently, but I do think every time I go through that training, and I've been through it at every job I've had for the last decade, I pick up something that either I didn't know before, or at least wasn't front of mind for me. And so, yeah, I think education is a great place to start.
For me, what I'd say is my father used to tell me, if you can't be good, at least be careful, right? So I'm actually going to leave you with exactly the same. You can't be good, guys. If you really, really need it, just make sure you're not touching customer data. Make sure you're not touching anything which is sensitive data in the least, and try to keep it minimized as much as possible. And please be careful.
When you say be careful, when you say be careful, I've got to ask this, Jason. Are you saying be careful not to break anything, or be careful not to be caught?
I was just going to say the same thing.
I'll leave this to audience discretion.
Yeah.
I don't want to be shot at the firing line just yet. I'm still on probation. Last time I checked.
Make your own decision, people.
Yeah, exactly.
Draw your own conclusion.
So from here, guys, this is a very good segue to our next segment with the very own Richard Hall for Try It with Talend, Job of the Week. Honestly, this is a brand new thing. We'll let you decide. Have a look.
Job of the Week section. If you have a better title idea, please let us know. We'll focus on a simple way of retrieving some of your Spotify data with Talend Open Studio. So let's get started. I've been given 15 minutes to work with, so I need to work quickly. As you'll see, I'm using Talend ESB V8, so if you want to download this job and try it, you'll need this version. This is a freshly installed version of the product, so just out of the wrapper, no changes made. Let's go to developer.spotify.com. This is where you go to get all of your Spotify information for development. Let's go to Dashboard. In Dashboard, this is where you can log into your account or sign up here if you don't have an account, but let's log in. Here you can see I already have one existing application. I built this to allow friends at a party to control the music via Twitter. This tutorial won't be doing anything that complicated. We'll simply be listing our most frequently played songs. An easy intro to using Talend with Spotify. Let's create an app. All we need here is an app name and an app description. You'll see I cheated somewhat because I already had the app description in my clipboard. Accept the terms of service and click Create. The next screen is the app overview screen. You'll see the client ID and the client secret as well. This is for authentication. We won't be working with this today to keep it simple. We don't need to make any changes to the edit settings section. This is where you would set redirect URIs and things like that to deal with authentication, which I said we're not dealing with today. Next we're going to look at the Spotify console. This is where you get to test out the Spotify API, trying out all sorts of different methods. We've got the album methods here which correspond to album calls. And we have my favourite section, which is the player section. This is where you get to start and stop music, move bits around, skip ahead, etc, etc. This is quite good when you're trying to deal with music on the fly, as you go, as it were. The method we're going to be working with today is in the personalization section and is the get users top items method. This is the curl command that is created from the parameters that you fill in on this page. You can also test them here. So now let's look at the API reference for the getUsersTopItems method. This method requires several parameters. We have type, which is track or albums, limit, offset and time range. We'll be going with the time range, which is a little bit longer because I want to see the complete history. So let's go back to the previous page where we can fill in these parameters. So as I said, for type it's tracks, not track. Time range we're going for long term. We're going to set a limit of 1 for this because we just want a short set of results, and we're not dealing with an offset because we're only making one call. Before we try it, we need to actually get a new authentication token. The select scopes page will come up. This shows you what permissions you want to authorize the token for. We're just going to go for users top read here. Now that we've authorized our token here, bear in mind this will only last for a short period of time, so will have to be redone. We can now run the method. As you can see, the JSON return is pretty instant and it's quite lengthy, but we'll be dissecting this with Talend to get the information that we want. Before we go back to Talend, let's copy the JSON and analyze it with JSONPathfinder.com. It's a really useful tool for analyzing a JSON whenever you're working with something that you've not seen before, or even if you have. When the page is open, remove the JSON that is there as an example and paste your JSON here. As you can see, it is broken down in the right panel into the JSON structure. You have the items, there will be multiple of these, but in this example we only wanted one. And if you click on any of these, for example name, you can see at the top right the JSON path that will be required. This is a really useful tool for playing around with your JSON. But now, back to Talend Open Studio. First, we need to create a new job. You can call it whatever you like. I've chosen to give mine the inspirational name of most popular Spotify songs. I sometimes struggle to type with an audience. The first component we will add is the TREST client. Since we know what we are looking for here, it is easier to simply go to where we want the component and start typing the name. No need to look in the palette for this one. It is also good practice to give the component a meaningful label as you go. I don't always do this and it can lead to a lot of tidying up afterwards, so it's always good to keep this in mind. To configure the TREST client, first we need to set the accept type to JSON. We can see it is already set as a GET method by default. We now need to set the URL. We will take this from the Spotify console where we've just tested. Here, we copy the URL with the parameters that were created in the console and paste it into the TREST client's URL field. We could set the parameters via the query parameters table below, but in this example, we'll just hardcode them. We will change the limit parameter here from 1 to 50, just to give us more results. Now let's look at the advanced settings. Here we will untick the wrap JSON response tick box. This is also where we can set extra HTTP headers, like our authorization header that's required. Add authorization with a Z as the header name, and in the value field add bearer with a space. Following this will be the auth code that we generated in the Spotify console webpage. As I said, I do tend to struggle typing with an audience, sorry about that. Generating and copying the OAuth token from the Spotify console is something that will need to be done while using this job. This can be done within Talend automatically, but I didn't have time to fit it into the 15 minutes I was given for this demo, unfortunately. Once the authorization header has been set, we're now in a position to test the TREST client to see whether it's configured correctly. To do this, we'll add a tlog row onto the TREST client. We now go to the Run tab and click on Run. The job will compile, run and print the output to the output window. We should be seeing something pretty similar to what was shown in the Spotify console. As you can see, we're seeing XML here instead of JSON. I overlooked a default on the TREST client's Advanced tab, unfortunately. We need to also untick the Convert Response to DOM document option. With that change made, let's run again and see if we get what we expect this time. As you can see, this time we get the JSON we expected. Our next task is to extract the data from the JSON. To do this, we'll add a tExtract JSON fields component to the tlog row. This component uses JSON path to access the required data within the JSON. First of all, we'll select the JSON field from the tlog row. In this case, it is a column called string. We then need to set the loop JSON path query. This tells the component to loop at this point in the JSON and creates a new row of data for every loop. In this case, we will be looping on track, or items as they are represented in the JSON. Let's take a quick look at the JSON from the Spotify console. We next need to set the output schema from this component. This will be 3 columns. We will include album, song, and artists. Once this is done, we now have to set the JSON paths for each of these. We have album.name, name, and artists. Let's take a look at the Spotify console to demonstrate. On second thoughts, this is better represented by the results we have in the JSONPathFinder.com site. Here you can see track name and the JSON path at the top, artists, although I neglected to click on that when I recorded this earlier. Then album.name. The JSON path is shown for this one. We can now test up until this point. It is always a good idea to test as you go. The tlog row components are really useful for this. They can also be easily deactivated when you don't want to see the output window filled with unnecessary logs. Now we've connected a tlog row, let's go to the Run tab and see what we get. You can see that we are getting rows of data instead of JSON. In the first column, we can see the album name. The second column, we have the song name. In the third column, it's a little bit different. I said that we were getting rows of data instead of JSON. Well, that wasn't strictly true. The third column contains a subsection of the JSON that represents the artists involved in the song or the track. To extract the data from this column, we will need to use another tExtract JSON fields component. But before we do that, there is an extra step we shall add. We need to add a tmap. When we extract the artists from the JSON, it will multiply the track rows by the number of artists for each track. So, if a track has 3 artists, it will be shown 3 times. If it has 16 artists, it will be shown 16 times. To make this easier to read when shown in rows, we're going to add a track number column. This will be done with the tmap component. As you can see, the first thing I'm doing here is simply moving all of the input columns to the output table. Now I am adding a song num column of type integer. I'll move the song num column to the top. I'll now create a tmap variable of type integer. This will be used to count the rows. The method I will use for this is the numeric sequence method. This needs no further configuration if it is the only one you are using, but you can replace the S1 with a unique name if you have more than one of these. Now to give it a meaningful name of songnum. And I'll connect this up to the songnum output field. Once this is done, we click apply and OK. Back on our job screen, we can see that the job is taking up the whole window at the moment, so let's just move it to the side a little bit and try again. Okay, now we need to add a tExtract JSON fields to extract the data from the artists JSON that we've just been looking at. The first thing we will do here is to set the schema. We will copy the entire input schema to the output schema. Now we will adjust the artists column to be called artist singular, as only one artist will be shown for each row. We set the loop JSON path query to loop on the root array. The JSON that has been extracted for artists is basically just a JSON array containing the data. This makes it very simple to work with. The only column we need to set a JSON path for here is the artist column. The path for this is name. The other columns are simply supplied by the incoming columns. Each of them will have their values just passed through and multiplied for every artist in the row's JSON array. We'll test this with another tlog row. It looks like this is all configured okay, so let's go to the Run tab and run it. Oh, before I do that, let's deactivate our other tlog rows. Remember earlier I said that these can easily be deactivated and they were quite useful to keep? Well, this is just how you can deactivate them. Now let's run it. So this returned nothing. That wasn't expected. Let's check the rows that are feeding the textract JSON fields component. I think I know what this is. This is an easy oversight to make. The JSON field column is set to be the first one by default. However, this does not contain our JSON array. That is the artist's incoming field. Now that I've changed that, let's try it again. This time it has worked. We can see each of the rows. On each of the rows is the song number, the album, the song and one of the artists for each song. As I said, the number of artists per song multiplies the number of rows, but you can see each song number on the very left, so you can easily see the group of records for each song. On looking through this list, I'm somewhat concerned that this is being filmed actually. All I will say is that I'm pretty eclectic with my music tastes, but I do share my Spotify account with my other half. Hamilton seems to have been pretty popular recently. This job will be made available for you to download, but before I export it, I should tidy up the names. At the beginning of this tutorial I mentioned that it is good practice to give meaningful names to your components, and I've not done this, so I'll do it now. This is by no means an attempt to distract you from the songs listed as most popular in my shared with my other half Spotify history list. I hope you found this tutorial interesting, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask.
Guys, thanks for joining us for today's episode. Hopefully that you found it as enjoyable as we found it recording it. If you like the content, just click like and click subscribe, or click subscribe. There'll be somewhere around there. We have a really awesome guy.
Depends on where we end up, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, so yeah, guys, just remember, like and subscribe, and make sure that you don't miss out on the next episode.